Hi, Angie. Oh, you are on mute.
Off to a rousing start. Hey, Animesh, how are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm excellent. Off to a rousing start. Hey,
I
Animesh, how
guess
are
we
you?
have audience.
Good. How about
We are live. We can get started. So, hey everyone. I know it's a bit early in India and it's very late in America, but thank you all for joining. So, today with me, I have Angie. She is a core maintainer and a product manager for Drupal for last 7 years. She's also a O'Reilly author and a mom. Also, the interesting fact is that she got to get started as in open source to the Google Summer of Code back in 2005. And since then, she has immersed completely herself in contributing and growing the open source community. So that's all about Angie. There are more. She's also a director of community at Aiven. So you can check it out. I'll be dropping the links in the comment in a while. Over to you, Angie.
All right. Hello, everybody. Great to see you. Really happy to be here tonight. This talk will be more around the time I've spent in the Drupal projects. I was in the Drupal project since I got my start in Google Summer of Code, so in 2005. And it was interesting because before Google Summer of Code, I kind of had this idea about open source that you had to be like this smart to like contribute to an open source project, and I could never, like this kind of thing. And then I found out that, once I got accepted in the program, I'm like, oh my gosh, anybody can do this. It's amazing. Whoops, my cat's knocking off things. Where's my screen go? There it is. And kind of just proceeded to like throw myself into it. So, I know some folks here may be thinking of applying for Google Summer of Code, maybe wanting to try out Drupal, that kind of thing. This talk's going to kind of go through some of the stuff around how we built the huge community around Drupal, and then we'll kind of go from there to answer whatever other questions that come up for folks. So, all right, so I'm going to jump in to my slides. I apologize. My cat would really, really like to join this meeting with us. So what I'm going to talk about lessons learned from scaling an open source community by 10,000%. So I am a community person. I'm a developer by trade, by origin story, but I found the people part of programming fascinating, and so kind of doubled in to learn more about that. And so this is kind of stuff that I've learned most of the hard way over the years, but some of it can be applicable if you're building your own community around the software projects that you're interested in, or the friend group that you have, or anything like that. Hopefully there's some stuff here you can take away. And then the plan is to talk for about 20 minutes, leave plenty of times for questions and all that kind of stuff. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So kind of covered that. My origin story, Google Summer of Code. I've participated on all ends of the Google Summer of Code, so I can speak to it from the student, the mentor, and the org admin perspective. In the Drupal project, I started as a core contributor, and then I became a core committer, a product manager, and sort of like the chief cat herder of that community. And it's a big community. It's about 2 million users, about 30,000 contributors. So it's kind of a massive project. So I got to see a lot during my time there. And then these days I work at Aiven, which is a data company that offers a bunch of like open source stuff on our platform, like Postgres or Redis or MySQL or OpenSearch, you name it. And I'm building community kind of from the other end, where instead of it being this massive community, it's a very small community. We're trying to build it up into something, so I can kind of cover community from both ends as well. All right, so Drupal, if you've not heard of it, this is not going to be a sales pitch for Drupal, but it is a free open source content management system. People like it because it's very flexible. It's wonderful for people who have clients who don't know what they want, because they're like, I don't know, I want a blog. It can be a blog. Now I want a shopping cart. So you can add a shopping cart to the blog. It's like very easy to extend. And it's an interesting thing to be a product manager of, because it is both, we call it like a Fram location. It's a development framework that's built off the Symfony library. So it's great for extending by APIs and this kind of thing, but it's also a no-code or low-code tool for building out very sophisticated websites. So you kind of have to keep both of those end-user personas in mind, and it's a lot of fun trying to balance those needs. So I'm going to attempt to cover 22 years of open source history in 22 minutes. Let's go. So back in 2001, some of you may not have been born yet, but this was what was cool back then. The first Shrek movie had come out. Wikipedia was this new thing that people were thinking about. Enron seemed like a really great thing to invest in. Xbox, the first Xbox, not the Xbox One, but the first Xbox was out, this kind of thing. And that's when Drupal 1.0 was released. So this is a picture of the project lead Dries wearing his sombrero in his college dorm room. And it kind of came about because really just wanting to experiment with kind of cutting edge technologies at the time, like RSS and, things of this nature, and trying to like create something that was modular, because at the time, the CMSs that were popular, it was like in order to make any extensions or that kind of thing, you had to like find line 32 and edit it to something else. And then as soon as you updated it, you'd lose your modifications. And it was a whole process of that. Drupal was built from the ground up to be very modular, so you can turn features on and off that you don't want. You can extend it without having to hack core, this kind of thing. So that was in 2001. I apologize, the date is not updated, but flash forward to 2023, and it's got this huge community around it, tons of active contributors, millions of websites are running it. At one point, it was running like 2 to 3% of the entire internet, which is bananas. It's used by all these different logos that you may or may not have heard of, but like basically people use it, and it came out of this little dorm room project. So like, how did that happen? So I'm going to talk through some of Drupal's, I call them pillars of community awesomeness, some of the things that made Drupal really awesome, some of the lessons learned to help us scale from like a little tiny project with only a few people up to this thing that's running like enterprise grade software and governments and this kind of stuff. So this is an overview of them. I'm going to jump into each one individually. So I'm going to skip over this slide, but don't worry, I'll wrap it up at the end and we can go back into it. So let's start with the first one, which might be a surprising one to start with, but this is a really important aspect of the Drupal project, which is we've made diversity and inclusion a foundational principle. And what I mean by that, actually, before I jump in, what I mean by that is, you might think to yourself, like, I just want to like get my project out. I just want to like find other people like me and we can hack on it. One of Drupal's core strengths, though, has been by making diversity a foundational principle, we get all kinds of people involved in the project. We got all kinds of perspectives, and that makes the project stronger and more resilient, able to accommodate lots of different use cases that would not be possible if we were only talking to ourselves. So a first step of this is you provide a code of conduct. There's a lot of like templates you can use. There's an interesting discussion about our code of conduct. It originally came from Ubuntu, and then we updated it to make it more direct so that we could actually enforce it, because, if you have a code of conduct, but people can still be jerks, that's not quite the vibe that you're going for. We also make a concerted effort to value all contributions. So beyond just code, things like accessibility testing, mentorship, planning events to get people together in person, multilingual translations, you name it. Try to value all of those contributions, because each people will have different skill levels, expertise areas, as well as time that they can give to the project. And if you try to intentionally have like a really big tent to pull in all those kinds of people, no matter who they are and what they have to contribute, you'll do really well with that. We also provide dedicated spaces for underrepresented voices to support one another and be heard. So there's like Drupal Chicks, there's the Drupal Rainbow Project. And this is really important for us because we have people with these identities, and when they find other people who are like them, it helps them feel a place of belonging. And it also helps us as a project to be more, to be smarter about how we go about, talking to different audiences, and, how we go about representing, them on our marketing materials and in our text that comes in the UI and all this kind of thing. And then we also provide a home for DEI interested folks to collaborate and educate. And so this is the Drupal Diversity and Inclusion Initiative. And this is a community kind of bottoms up initiative of people who are developing best practices, not just for Drupal, but for the wider web and projects and open source in general, to try to avoid kind of stepping on a rake every time that you try to involve folks that are not dudes. No offense to any dudes. Dudes are great. But the other thing that you want to do with this is, it's all well and good to be like, okay, we have a diversity group, check. But what you actually want to do is have meaningful engagement with the diversity groups. So for example, make a concerted effort in your projects to not only, kind of have a diversity group that's over here on the side, but embed people from a variety of different backgrounds in your leadership structure. And that means like technical leadership, if you have core committers or subsystem maintainers, that kind of thing. Your governance, if you have like, the Apache Foundation, for example, has a PMC, which is like a project management committee, this kind of thing. If you have a nonprofit associated with the project, getting leadership in there is really good for anybody in your community to be able to look at your leadership and kind of see themselves represented in it. It sends out a strong signal that they belong and they'll be included. Another huge foundational point for this is making sure that everyone can use your stuff. So Drupal has a huge commitment to accessibility. Every core commit that goes in that has anything UI facing has to go through an accessibility gate to make sure that it is appropriate for people who are blind, people with color issues, mobility issues, you name it. We follow all these great W3C standards to make sure that's all copacetic. The second pillar would be, crafting a delightful contributor onboarding experience. We think a lot about our project and how powerful it needs to be and how it needs to just really get in there and be awesome. But you really want to think through how your new contributors who are going to give you code, documentation, all those other things we talked about, how they're going to come into your project and what their experience is going to be like. Why? Because you want to get folks over this suck threshold as soon as possible. Anytime you start a new tool, you kind of bang your head into the furniture a little bit, trying to figure out where are all the options and how can I tweak it and this kind of thing. What you want to do is get people from, what's this thing, to, oh my God, this thing is amazing, as quickly as possible. So in Drupal, the way we do this is we have a group of mentors, so they'll wear like the same color of t-shirts and they go to our big conference. And then there's a dedicated room where they do a first-time contributor workshop and then like one-on-one mentoring with different people who want to get started contributing but don't really know where to start. So from the morning, they get set up with all the tools. By the afternoon, they are sitting within a group of people and they're working on actual issues for the project. Tooling is really important. If it takes, 50 million years in order to like get a development environment up and running, or it's very finicky and there's a lot of manual stuff, that's no good. We use something called Drupal, which is built off of Gitpod to just get people going in a couple of clicks. Peer-to-peer learning is also a really interesting thing. In the Drupal dojo, basically what it was is that instead of having to be a big proper thing where like I prep a presentation and this kind of thing, it would just be like people getting together and talking about some cool thing they learned about Drupal. So for example, someone could be like, hey, I tried this add-on, this module. It was really cool. Here, let me show you a quick demo of it. Somebody else could be like, I had the hugest problem and I debugged it and this is what I did, but just developers and site builders and stuff talking to each other in kind of a low pressure, low key environment was huge in terms of like making Drupal more accessible and kind of getting people on board. I'll go ahead and jump into the third pillar unless there's any questions, which is taking community ownership to extremes.
There is a question like Ayush is asking, what metrics did Drupal focused more to see the contributors growth? I mean, here the activities that you did. So which one was which activities did and what metrics were you looking forward to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say like Drupal is old enough that for a lot of it, we did not measure metrics because that wasn't really a best practice at the time. However, once we started to get a bit more disciplined around that area, we would look at a few different things. And actually, if you want to see something cool, there's this project called the Chaos Community, which let me just pop that in here. These people have done nothing but think about ways to measure community health in an open source project. So that would be the encyclopedic answer. I would say for Drupal, though, we look at a few different things. We look at adoption of like the end users of Drupal. Is that going up or down? And even that was tricky because Drupal made a huge shift into the enterprise, which meant fewer sites. Like we didn't get as many cat blogs. Those all go into Tumblr or whatever, but we started to get, like massive sites that were very complex and, multi-sites, universities running their whole university on it, that kind of thing. So there was one metric we looked at is we have a module called update status, which tracks all the Drupal sites out there and making sure that number is kind of going up and to the right is one thing. Another thing we looked at is the number of contributors, so the people actually contributing, and we track this at the issue level, so not just code, but documentation, attending meetings, that we'd have about this, that, and the other thing, going to the conferences, that kind of stuff. We'd be tracking contributors who were doing activities and making sure like they were coming back. And if they weren't coming back, we kind of drill into that and figure out what's up. Sometimes people need to step away for family. Sometimes people are really frustrated. So then we would get like one of the governance groups to get involved, that kind of stuff. So that kind of thing. So we would track, adoption. We would track number of contributors, overall contribution activity. And one I never got around to tracking, but I think is a really, really good metric for people to track is I call it like time to trivial bug fix. And what I mean by that is if I find a typo in your software and I file a PR about that, how long does it take for that trivial fix to get committed? Because that's a really good indication of how good the rest of the whole system is working. Because complex issues with a lot of moving parts or that changed billions of lines of code, you'd expect those to take a long time. But if a tiny little one sentence fix takes also 6 to 10 months, you're going to lose people that way. So that is a metric we never got around to pushing during my time in Drupal, but that's something that I heavily encourage open source projects, anyone who's trying to contribute or attract contributors to your project to really focus on that. Because that's a huge way to engage. My cat would like to say hello. That's Cooper. Anyway, that's a great question, though. Thank you. And right back at you. I'd love to know what metrics that you're tracking in your work as well. All right, I'm going to take this next one, community ownership. Yeah. So, it's all well and good to have places for contributors to go and an onboarding process that's awesome and all this kind of stuff. But you can't just tell people what to do, right? You can guide people, you can give them strong signposts, but people ultimately are going to do what they want to do, which is why a lot of people call community management cat herding, because that's a lot what it feels like, when you're trying to give a presentation and your cat is like, no, I want to have a conversation right now, right? So a big part of engaging a community around your project is how much do they feel like they have power to own things, to drive things that they're passionate about, this kind of thing. And so this is kind of an area that Drupal, has done a lot around. This is a Mr. Rogers quote, but you want to look for the helpers because you're always going to find people who are helping. And we want to find those helpers. We want to get all of the barriers out of their way so that they can go nuts helping us as much as possible. So what we did is we slapped an edit button on everything. So the documentation is a wiki. Anybody can create a project. Anyone can edit, anyone can submit a translation. Basically, anything that someone can do, someone can edit, including reporting things as spam. Because as you can imagine, if anyone can edit things, someone will take advantage of that. So there's the ability then for the community to also kind of police itself by reporting things as spam to an admin. You want to also provide ways for your community to help build your community. So something that Drupal did quite early was the notion of these Drupal groups, which is online groups either around a particular location or around a particular interest group. So for example, there could be a Drupal group around the problem of internationalization, and so anybody who cared about that issue could all kind of go into one topic-based group and start talking. There's also the notion of these Drupal events all over the world. So there's Drupal meetups, Drupal camps, you name it, but basically making it really easy, not only for people to hold these things, but also to, surface that they're happening for people. So that is a couple of key ways that we do this. And it kind of helps to get people really fired up and excited about different initiatives that they can own. Another area in here around this is investing in project governance to reduce burnout. Governance sounds like the most boring topic in the world, and it kind of is. But what's not a boring topic is when your key contributors are so burnt out that they end up quitting your project, or they end up being very toxic on the way out and taking out a bunch of other people with you. So by being intentional about this, you can kind of stop that from happening. So I put this stuff on a continuum. You basically want to look, and it kind of ties into the previous thing, where you want to look for where is the minimum viable trust that you need to enable somebody to help you. So for example, something like security issues, they need a lot of trust, right? Legal stuff, lots of trust. You do not want randos on the internet handling your security or handling your legal needs. But, something like writing a case study or helping out other users or creating a documentation page, a lot less trust is needed there. And so we kind of plot these things around an axis. I would encourage you to also think about your project in that way of what are the different ways you want people to engage and get involved, and how much of that can you kind of shift left so that more people can get involved in those areas, and it doesn't have to be gate kept around specific permissions and things like that. In Drupal, this is kind of how we took this massive crap and then like structured it a little bit. So individual contributors can do a bunch of different things. Where it starts to get more complicated and it needs more coordination, we basically create informal teams around that. So anybody can create their own team. Anybody can say, I want to build a team for this. And we're like, go for it. But you can't actually manage a product if everything is willy-nilly with whatever people want to work on. So where we want like official initiatives or official development in a direction that we want to like be able to communicate that Drupal is going in, that gets like a more formal working group around it. So different core initiatives, the security working group, the technical working group, things of that nature. And then where it's like, we're going to get sued if this is wrong or something of that nature. Formal governing bodies. So we use the Drupal Association. A lot of projects have foundations or nonprofits associated with them. That's more for that kind of stuff. And when you kind of block those things around, so for example, if in order to make a documentation change, I needed to appeal to the project maintainer, right? That's not a good model. But at the same time saying, hey, people, we're going to crowdsource this lawsuit that we're on, that is also not a good thing. So it's sort of about making common sense decisions in this area. And the other thing I would say about this is to leave ample room for innovation. So, Drupal's running governments, it's running big media companies, it's running all kinds of things, like I said. So the core thing needs to be really locked down tight. We need to make sure that people don't break it willy-nilly. It has a lot of checks and balances. But you want to be able to experiment. You want to be able to innovate. So on the other side of that, we have something called Drupal Contrib, which is where anybody can create a project. It might be full of bugs. That's fine. We don't care. And so we sort of like gradually move things across here. It's like if it's used by a ton of people, now it gets a designation as like a golden contrib module. It has a bunch of metrics on the page to show its usage, whether or not it's covered by the security team, whether or not it has test coverage, code security coverage, that kind of thing. And then we also have the notion within core of like experimental modules. So this way we can ship a feature, have lots of people try it, but without the kind of burden of like having it locked into the core product and now we have to support it forever. So that's kind of how we've been handling that there. And the last thing I'd say about this is individuals, one, they burn out. Two, they tend to take way too much responsibility. And three, you want them to go on vacation and be healthy and happy. So we have moved away from like specific individuals to managing different things instead to roles and teams and things of that nature. So whatever the project is that all the things that you have to do, think about if you can take that responsibility and spin it off into a group of people that do that thing. And this is, I think, this is the last one because I see you and I know there's a question, so I'll get through this fast. You want to plan for the future as well. So when those individuals eventually move on, hopefully for really happy reasons, you want to make sure that there's other people in line who are equipped to replace them. So we have the notion of provisional maintainers, which is the idea of like, I'm not a core committer, but I hang out with the core committers and I kind of do patch reviews with them and I see how that goes. The idea of renewable term limits. So the idea that you force people into retirement for at least a year so that they can kind of see the sky again and all that kind of stuff. And then the idea of like emeritus recognition, where you really honor the people that came before you and kind of get them, up on a pedestal. So. Oops, and that's that. Yes, Animesh, how can I help you?
So I have a question. Like Danny have asked, like what all steps are necessary to build a government? So in the example that you gave, so I'm assuming reference to that, like what steps did you initially took to build a base governments, I think.
So I will at the end have a resource that's really good for this, but maybe I can spoil alert it quickly.
You can share it with me. I'll share in the comments with everyone.
Yeah. I'm just looking for it real quick. So there is, I think this is the project, but okay, I will say words, Angie. Okay, so the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, is an organization that this is not at all like what they do, but basically they sort of like take very strategic open source projects and they put some structure around them, some funding behind them, like this kind of thing, to make sure that they like sort of stick around a lot. They have a whole section of their handbook on this topic. And they also, which I assume is linked from here somewhere, they also have like a a whole situation of like different templates for project governance, which is amazing because if you are a one person, I am the boss of my own open source project, and I would be so thrilled if I got a contributor. Like if that's the level of governance that you're at, you obviously don't need any of this stuff that I'm talking about today, right? You are more on the other end of it where you need to you need to get people into your project, right? You need to raise awareness about your project. You need to get people excited about it, give them a reason to come to you so that then you have these problems, right? But so what this project does, which I've just pasted in chat here, is it's basically like a set of templates for kind of differently sized projects. So if you're a very small project, I would say the first things that we started doing was number one, stretching out the BDFL, the benevolent dictator for life, like the one project maintainer of our project. We had to be able to scale him. So we started anointing other committers. So there are other people that could use that could commit changes to the software. It wasn't all on one person. And then the second thing was getting that code of conduct in place so that people understand what kind of community this is, whether or not it's welcoming to newcomers, or if you want only people that are the smart or whatever it is in your community. I would say like those are two pretty important things to have, as well as some notion of like the contributor onboarding experience so people can get into your project and actually work on it. Then you will hit issues where people are like, I want to take this thing on, or I want to take that thing on. And then you start to branch more out into, okay, well, now let's talk about these team structures. How do those work? What teams do we need? Who's involved in the teams? Do we want to do it like democratic? Do we want to do it by merit, whatever, like these kinds of things. And then you start asking yourself different questions. But once you get into teams, now you can start scaling even more, right? Because you're no longer scaling on individuals from the project lead, but you're now scaling to it like groups of people. But with that requires a lot more coordination, because if these people are all working in silos and not talking to each other, that can cause problems too. So I would say like there's a few different phases that a project goes through, but I would say some of the really key things we'll talk about at the end of this when I'm talking about scaling a community from nothing. But I would say like, getting the scalability of the project lead. If you hate doing marketing and you just want to do code all the time, great. But find somebody who knows about marketing who can help you. Or if you're like, I want to actually learn more about like building a business around my open source project and I don't really care about the code anymore, find people who care about the code, right? So just find people to sort of augment you where you are, where your interests aren't, or like this kind of a thing. And then more or less listen to your community and build out the governance over time as you need it.
Gotcha. I think you have not shared the links yet. So
I'm sorry, I shared them in the public thing, but I forgot to share them in the private thing. Here you go.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
For those watching this, there's like two different chats and I put it in the wrong one. I'm very sorry. But anyway, that was a great question, Danny. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to talk about never missing a chance to celebrate your community. And this is something you can start no matter what your project size is. Anytime a community member does anything at all, figure out how to celebrate it. You can do a community spotlight, like in your forum or on your blog. You can, at DrupalCon, what we'll do is I talked about how there's the room with the first-time contributors. We get at least a couple of those, contributors, and we do a live core commit. So like in an audience full of people, we will like get a committer on stage who's like sitting there committing their code live, and there's applause and all this kind of stuff. And everybody critiques my use of Git, which is always fun to do in front of hundreds of people. But anyway, this is really fun. It like gets people energized and excited about contributing. Leaderboards are kind of a mixed bag, so I put a question mark there. One thing you can do is you can say, here's a list of all our contributors ranked by the number of contributions that they've made. Yay. But just be careful about this, because number one, this tends to underemphasize people who are contributing in non-code ways. Like the person who organized the hackathon that caused this big feature to happen probably isn't going to show up on that list, because they spent all their time in Gmail and Google Calendar and not so much in your issue queue or in Git. The other thing it can drive is a really competitive streak in people, because they just got to get to the next number in the list. And that can be fun to an extent, but it can also like harm the collaboration kind of critique, in between people. So just watch it with leaderboards a little bit. And then I would say another thing that we've done, which is kind of interesting, there's a huge problem with open source broadly in terms of sustainability. So, you can create an open source project, you do it just for yourself. All of a sudden it takes off like wildfire and businesses are running their businesses on it. And all of a sudden you're like, what the heck? Like, I didn't get into it for all of this, and people are spending their nights and weekends time and not seeing their families. And it's a whole situation. So something that can be interesting is to kind of try to orient your project so that you can be Robin Hood. So you can funnel corporate money into your project sustainability. And you have to handle this carefully because you don't want to give up like your rights to some corporate interest, but there's different ways to go about this. And this is how we've done it. So we created opportunities for a commercial ecosystem to form around the project. So because Drupal makes websites, well, it can make applications, it can make lots of different things, but a lot of people use it for websites. It's possible to, even though the software is free, build a business around creating custom Drupal sites for people, or custom development of new functionality that doesn't exist, or support it, help people fix it when it's broken, or host it, this kind of thing. So taking a look at your open source project and looking for commercial opportunities like that, if you build an ecosystem around it instead of being like the one company that does that, now all of a sudden other companies have an interest in growing and then helping you to grow because they benefit as well when your project grows. This is an interesting thing we've rolled out. We're trying to get this into GitLab upstream, but it's a notion of commit credit. So when I am working on an issue and I'm committing it, I can give it an organization. So I can say, I'm doing this as a volunteer, I'm doing it as on behalf of my employer, or I'm doing it on behalf of a customer. And what that allows me to do is like, I can basically give my organization credit for giving me time to work on things, which then shows up in our little marketplace thing. So you have a marketplace of all the companies. It's all sorted by the number of contributions that a company has done. So people have a very commercially invested incentive to give back, to contribute code, to contribute time to organize events, this kind of thing, to contribute case studies, you name it. And the result of that over like many years of work is the majority of Drupal contributions at this point are sponsored. So you can see like a graph here. So instead of this being a project that's entirely volunteer run, which it was in the beginning, it's changed over time to the point that a lot of people get actual work time or customer time to work on Drupal itself, which is very, very good for sustainability. And then, like I said, we're trying to get this into GitLab upstream, which would be amazing because then all open source projects could benefit from this. But, there's lots of issues GitLab has that they want to do, so we'll see how that goes. The last thing I think is that you want to have a plan for when stuff happens. So here was a fun thing that happened, a couple of fun things. So Drupal has a fork that called Backdrop that was made around the time of Drupal 8. There was a controversy where we actually enforced that code of conduct that I talked about, and it caused a huge kerfuffle. We were on the front page of Breitbart, which is a right-wing kind of newspaper sort of thing. A bunch of us got doxxed on 4chan over this. It was not good stuff, right? So anyway, I've seen some stuff that could go wrong in an open source project or in a big community. And so hopefully before you ever get into a situation like this, I want to give you a few tips on how to handle it. So if you ever are in a community crisis, here is my recommendation to you. Number one, get everybody into as rich a medium as possible. And what I mean by that is real life is the best, a video call is second best, an audio call if you have to, and if you absolutely can't do it anywhere, text. But you have to understand that each one of those levels removes a level of familiarity, remembering that we're all humans, that kind of thing. If it's a bunch of text names yelling on the internet versus you can get two people in a room seeing each other and their bodies and their very human faces, it can have a very transformative effect. The other thing I'd say is you got to make sure all sides are heard. It doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. They have to be able to be heard. They have to be able to say their piece. And you have to demonstrate that you're listening as well. We ended up getting a neutral third party involved in this and holding little sessions at DrupalCon to get everybody in the same room. because the problem was like mistrust of governance, which sometimes happens. You don't maybe need to go that far, but you do definitely need to not shut people down if they have concerns. Because if you listen, then you can actually identify their underlying problems. You can publicly acknowledge them and also address them. And important here is, particularly when we're, for example, dealing with the Drupal fork, you don't get into the Hacker News comments and start doing this, right? Like that is not the way to, that's a way to pour gasoline on a fire. What you want to do is listen to what people are saying and respond, but respond in your own way, in your own time, on your own, sort of medium, so that you're not adding fuel to the discussion and you're not, causing an even bigger problem because now the project lead yelled at you and, like this kind of thing. So, and then the last thing is creating spaces for healing, which sounds very hippy dippy. But if you go through something like this, it actually is really tough. You'd think, it's just the internet, people can shut it off. But, especially when people are forming their livelihoods around your project, it's like they really do care. It is personal for them. So finding a way to, get people in a room, hug it out, this kind of thing is a really good thing to do. So as a wrap, those are the Drupal pillars of community awesomeness. So trying to make diversity inclusion a foundation principle, really honing in on that contributor onboarding experience, giving your community ownership over as much as you can. Project governance, it's boring but essential. Celebrate the people in your community who are awesome. Try to figure out creative ways to bring money into your project without sacrificing your stake in it. And finally, think ahead of time what you want to have happen if something happens. Thank you very much. Oh, shoot. I can't hear you. Is that a me problem or?
No, I was on mute.
Okay, right on. Cool.
Yep. So yeah, people do have some questions.
Sure.
First is Ayush. Ayush. Oh, so sorry. So on my screen there are two different Ayush. The first one is, so I think you mentioned about the sponsored, both the volunteers as well as the purely volunteers. Yeah.
Yep.
So he's asking that sponsor ones are the incentives ones, or I think the ones you have mentioned before, or the funds one flowing.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I mean by that is, so we just to cover this in a little bit more detail. So on the Drupal website, and there's many different ways to do this. This is just how we've done it in particular. There's a couple of places where we feature this. So on an individual person's profile, so like if you look up WebChick on the Drupal.org site, it shows all of the things I've ever done in a big list. It's not really well laid out, but it's very comprehensive. So you can see what modules I've contributed, what patches I've gotten into what projects. You can see documentation pages I've written, blah, 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 this kind of thing. So what we did is we took that notion of tracking what an individual is contributing and we broaden it to the organization that person is a part of. And so now we track that contribution on the organization level as well. And not just for their employer, because your employer can change right over time. But also for a customer that you're working for. So let's say that you're working on a project and you're employed by Acme Core, but you're doing a project for Amnesty International because that's your customer. You can actually credit both of those organizations through your work, or you can denote, even though I am employed by such and such a company, they're not giving me any time to do this, so I am a volunteer. And that kind of applies some light social pressure on those organizations to find a way, whether it's like 5% time or like whatever, but find a way to give their employees time to give back. And then the advantage of this little list thing is that when you go to the marketplace to try to find a Drupal company to work for or work with on whatever project you've got going on, it's going to put the people who contribute the most at the top of that list. And that makes it so that businesses want to contribute back because that means they get more business. So it's sort of like this nice little circle of love where you figure out that companies are motivated by making money. Open source projects are motivated by getting more contributions. And so you find a way to make that a nice beneficial cycle. You have to be careful because, people will try to gamify it because they do. And so you have to like, kind of always play this like cat and mouse game of like, well, now we're going to adjust the weights so that this kind of contribution gets more than this, or, checking for that kind of stuff. But it's a neat thing to see it play out and like, see a thing like this, because most open source projects, it would be 95% volunteer and maybe a couple of things sponsored. So to have it flipped around in our project is actually pretty cool.
That makes sense. So this is something that I want to ask. What are the some things that you think open source, now majority of the open source projects that have been started are very on a small scale. So what are some things that you would suggest them to do to have their contributors, recognize their contributors? I know there are a lot of uh, badges kind of thing like holopin, the want, which do a great work. So it's like
Yep.
people get recognition. Okay, you have done these things, you get this badge, you can show it off. It's something like a badge or a what kind of thing recognizing for you. I am aware that Meshery does, like they have listed all their contributors on their websites. But though the Meshery project is a bit more, I would say, at the have a lot of contributors and maintainers, so they are able to do so.
Yep.
But what are some things that small projects can do?
So when Drupal was very small, yeah, like things like a leaderboard or whatever, that wouldn't have really made sense because it'd just be the same faces on it all the time. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. So kind of how we got started was this notion of like a contributor spotlight. So whenever we'd see a new face in the issue queue and they were doing something interesting, we just pull them aside and be like, hey, would you mind answering a few questions? And then we'd like write it up and we'd put it on like the blog, I even just put it on my personal blog at first because like just to get something out there. And then over time that sort of built up because you'd start to see, say 1 month we would feature somebody contributing like a patch through core, like a traditional developer kind of person. But another month we might feature somebody contributing like usability testing, or somebody who wrote a really great documentation tutorial, someone who answered a support question really well. You try to find a lot of different types of people doing a lot of different things, and then you start to build up. And again, that whole notion of if you in the audience can see somebody, either in leadership or getting featured in this way or something like that, that like it feels really good and it's like really nice, and it makes you feel like, okay, I can belong here. This is a project worth sticking around and this is a project worth investing my time in. The notion of badges and stuff like that. So there are community platforms, for example, like Discourse is a common one. It's like Stack Overflow if it were a forum, more or less. And they have the notion of badges. And so you can do some pretty creative stuff there where it comes with some default ones where it's like, if you're so active, you get this rank improvement or that kind of thing. But you can make badges for anything, So you can make badge for like best cookies brought to an event or something, like whatever you want, but like get creative with it and find different ways. What's neat about using like an external system, like you were talking about, like let's say like Credly or something like that, is if people share that, now it's being shared like on their LinkedIn, right? And so now you're getting like brand awareness in addition to getting the good feeling that you get out of it, that kind of stuff. So what I would say is if you're very small, I would start small. I would figure out, kind of try to get the map of like what your community even consists of, because what you'll start with is you'll start with like, this person I don't recognize. Oh, and that person I don't recognize. Oh, that's really interesting. What you want to do is kind of like figure out if there are themes in that. And then once you know the themes, using something like, there's a bunch of different ones. Credly is the only one that's coming up for me right now, but like things of that nature is great. Mozilla has one as well, because then that gets like, broader awareness that your project exists, people are doing things, but people also won't be as inclined to put that on their LinkedIn until like, it means something to other people, so it's kind of like it's kind of like a give and take thing where you need a certain amount of awareness of what your project is before that sort of motion takes off. But it's a great one, because it makes people feel good. The one thing I just caution you is that leaderboard thing again. You'll get some people who just want to stack up all the badges, which is fine. But a lot of times, once they've reached the top tier, then they're out. And what you're looking to do is build long-term relationships with people. So I would say don't go bananas just making badges all, for everything. I would say, like, just kind of like be intentional about it, but look for those really special things that you can do to make people feel awesome.
Hmm. That makes sense. So yeah, Cradley is the one, Badger is second, that acts like a Cradley, and the last is the one, the shareable ones that I'm aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, the shareable ones are great. Yeah, but once again, you have to make sure people want to share them. So that's the other thing, is don't make it too corny or like whatever, But basically, if you make it sound like they're awesome, so for example, you could call it, top forum poster, right, or something like that,
Mm,
or you could call it like,
top discussion
knowledge
creator
wizard
or
expert. Yes,
yeah,
exactly. And then that's something I want to show off because I feel good about that, right? So
right, right. Right. So I think I have this one last question. That's by Ayush Kumar. So he's been asking the only I want to know. So he's been contributing to the field of Golang programming, and he's been working on this particular language for last 6 to 7 months and have learned a lot.
yeah,
So in this GSOC 2024, he wants to know how can I get a better chance of getting accepted in the organization with using
yeah, that's a
Golang.
great question. So give me 1 second while you said Golang, right? I think you
Yeah.
did. Yeah. So I was just looking because normally,
Yeah.
normally what happens in Google Summer of Code is an organization like Go will um, basically have two kind of tracks. One is they have a list of projects that need doing. Generally speaking, these should not be like critical path projects, but rather like, ooh, wouldn't that be cool if it got done kind of projects. And so, like, taking a look at those, seeing if any of those match your interests is one way to do it, because then you know what the project wants, right? And you can go after something where you're. It's like you don't have to guess. Then you don't have to be like, I have this cool idea about making a cat avocado for Go, right? But they maybe don't care about that, so maybe like that's not the thing to do. So I would take a look at their project list. I'd also join whatever their Discord, IRC, Slack, whatever it is, to kind of just lurk in there a little bit and find out like what they're talking about. Kind of get a feel of
Mhm.
who the movers and shakers are, and this kind of thing. Um, and the reason to do that is because on the organizational admin side, usually what happens is you get way more applications than you could possibly ever use, right? And so you have to filter them down somehow. Some of them are very easy to filter. For example, if you fire hose the exact same application to 50 different open source projects, we can tell we're not stupid. If you use Chat GPT to write your thing, we can tell. You know what I mean? So don't do tricks like that, right? If you're interested in working in Go and you've already been contributing for 6 to 7 months, you're already at the top of their list anyway, I would suspect, unless you're contributing and also calling people mean names at the same time. So what I would do then is I would say, look at the projects that they're already proposing. If you're already in the community, you probably have a good sense of what they need and what they don't. And then I would say to tailor your application to that project and to that organization. And this is true of applying for jobs as well, but it's just, again, on the other side of things, when you're reviewing hundreds of applications potentially for your project, if somebody calls out like, I've been a Go contributor since da 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 da, and I've already done these things, and I want to get even more involved in this community, and here's the cool thing I want to do, that stands out, right? And it's very obvious that that person put time and intention into that application as opposed to just fire hosing a bunch of stuff or getting AI to write it for them. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing I'd say is like the way the timeline works, it's like students apply, organizations have some time to like, sift through the
Go through
applications, figure out who they're going to pick. And then there's a period of time before that, get involved in the community and stay there during that time, because that will also help build confidence.
Like I would like to add on one thing more. Instead
Yeah.
of DMing mentors or anyone in the community on their personal chats, basically, prefer to discuss in the communities or the discussion panels directly, the forums that are in a public channel, maybe GitHub discussions or the forum if they have any other forum channels, because the other people, other contributors will also notice you. They'll be see what you are doing, what you're contributing, so that also helps to.
Yeah.
And obviously the mentors will be involved in the discussion with you, but that would be an open discussion rather than the closed ones where background at the background people are not noticing or may not know what you are doing, what the things you have worked on, what are your contributions.
That is a great point. For two reasons. Number one, yes, for the visibility around your stuff, so it's not trapped in some DM somewhere. But number two, there are a lot of people who do not like it when you just DM them out of the blue and they don't know who you are. And so if
Yeah,
you do that and that happens to be the mentor that's reviewing your application, that could actually count against you. So I would,
right.
yes, exactly what Anmesh said. Find the Discord, find the forums, find the whatever the places they talk, and talk in the main area that they talk. Like there could be a
Yeah,
Google Summer of Code channel, that's fine, talk in there. But
yeah,
talk in the main area, talk in the social channel, like get to know these people, because it's a lot of stuff on your side too, right? That's months of your, it's like weeks or months of your time. Make sure that this is a cool community and you want to be involved in it. So
so I think that's the all the questions that we had. uh Anyone else have any questions? You can. Okay, so you can connect with Angie on her LinkedIn as well as Twitter. I'll be sharing the links with you all.
yeah. The one other thing I could leave you with here is on that topic of open source and pitfalls and things of that nature. There's a blog that I wrote the other day. I'm going to paste this in the right chat this time. I'll just paste it in both, and then we're covered. But yeah, that talks about open source pitfalls that can happen if you're new to open source, and it talks about the importance of kind of some of the things that we just said. Talking to people where they are and kind of getting a feel for the project before you dive headfirst and just slinging code in there. So, yeah.
Okay, and there's one more blog that I want to share. It's by Angie herself. I think this will pretty much sum up all around all the DevRels that are working on their community to scale it up and are in the open source.
Yeah, this is a blog series that's kind of ongoing, but I've been having a lot of conversations with folks in the DevRel and community space, especially recently. And just there's a lot of kind of the same themes that come up over and over again. So this series is my attempt to like brain dump everything that I've learned in the past 20 years or so, in the hopes that it could help somebody else. So
Definitely. Definitely, I think it would be helpful for everyone because the DevRel community is something that you know do a lot of trial and experimental with programs and the community each month or maybe in a couple of quarters.
yeah, and a lot of this is just human stuff too, right? So
Yeah.
how to deal with management, how to deal with people who don't care about what you're working on, like that kind of stuff. That's kind of stuff that comes up for everybody. So yeah, some ideas in there. Also happy to hear other people's ideas on what's worked for you. And then yeah, the one other thing I'll say about just Google Summer of Code, I know it can be scary. It's like, whoa, I know it's a big program. Just apply. Worst case scenario, it doesn't happen. But best case scenario, you get to make a career out of open source, which is amazing. So try to have confidence. Like just, have the confidence of my cat to believe that she can have a conversation with me on a live stream, and just channel your inner Cooper and just apply. That's what I would say. But yeah.
I think that's all. Thank you everyone for joining in. I know some of you may be leaving for work, some of you may be leaving for a bedtime. So I hope you have a great day and good night. Thank you all. Thank you for joining in. Bye everyone.
Thank you, Animesh.